Hey guys, tonight we're wandering into the flickering candlelight of a medieval royal bedchamber, a world of carved oak furniture, embroidered sheets, and a heady mix of perfume and political expectation. And at the center of this world sits one of the strangest beliefs to ever circulate in court, that sleeping with a virgin could cure syphilis. It didn't. Of course, it didn't. But in an age before germ theory, before anyone understood bacteria or viruses, it sounded just plausible enough to catch on. It traveled along the same routes as spices, gossip, and bad poetry whispered from court to court, until it became a quiet, unspoken treatment. Among those who could afford to act on it, you probably won't survive this, not from scandal or poison, but from the second-hand embarrassment of how openly royal bedrooms were sometimes treated as matters of state. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, post your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where my sleepy historians are tuning in from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. Imagine the great hall after a wedding feast, tables littered with trenchers, half-finished goblets of wine, and the scent of roast swan fading into the rafters. Courtiers murmur and shuffle, because tonight's entertainment isn't entirely over. The newly married royal couple is about to retire, and the court, in its infinite lack of boundaries, is going with them. Mainstream historical fact: in certain royal households, consummation was observed, at least symbolically, by members of the nobility or clergy. Their presence was meant to confirm that the marriage had been physically sealed, ensuring that any heirs born later would be legitimate. In practice, it often meant watching the couple climb into bed, murmuring blessings, and then retreating, usually. Quirky tidbit: in some French and Spanish courts, the bedding was preceded by a ceremonial undressing of the bride and groom by attendants of the opposite sex, ostensibly to help, but more likely to make the moment more theatrical. The bed might be sprinkled with spices and rose petals, or in some cases, blessed with holy water before the curtains were drawn. Historians still argue whether these public elements were always purely symbolic, or if some witnesses lingered awkwardly, waiting for signs that the couple's duties were underway. The record is suspiciously quiet on how long anyone actually stayed. And into this ritual stage, the syphilis superstition could slip neatly. A noble stricken with the disease might push for a young, untouched bride, publicly justified as a political match, but privately seen by him as a potential cure. The tragedy was that the only thing such a union passed on with certainty was the disease itself. The couple, now tucked beneath an embroidered canopy bearing the family crest, exchange a look that might mean love or mutual resignation. Outside the bed curtains, courtiers chuckle, a bishop coughs discreetly, and somewhere in the crowd, Someone is already planning how to retell the night's events over breakfast. Royal love, as you can tell, was rarely private and never entirely about love. The candles burn lower now, their light turning from gold to amber, shadows stretching long against the embroidered hangings. The witnesses to the royal bedding ceremony shuffle their feet, unsure whether to keep staring or politely pretend to be fascinated by the carved bedposts. Because in this world, the act of getting a royal couple into bed was almost as important as anything that might happen afterward. The bedding ceremony was a formal, structured event, equal parts theater, superstition, and political confirmation. Mainstream historical fact. In many European courts, from the Middle Ages through the Renaissance, the newlyweds were ceremonially escorted from the feast to their bedchamber. The bride's and groom's attendants would undress them to their linens, often in front of the gathered company, before tucking them under the covers. This was all done in solemn, deliberate fashion, like reading from a script everyone already knew. A quirky tidbit. In some parts of Scotland and northern England, the bedding was preceded by noisy, teasing songs from the guests, half blessing, half bawdy jest. Elsewhere, silence was the rule, broken only by the muttered Latin of a priest sprinkling holy water over the pillows. Historians still argue whether these ceremonies were rooted more in genuine fertility blessings or in the cold politics of proving a marriage legitimate. In the absence of modern paperwork, a room full of nobles could act as living witnesses that, yes, they were in bed together. Tonight's scene unfolds with slow precision. The queen's hair is unpinned, her jeweled gown unfastened by careful fingers, revealing the fine shift beneath. The groom's doublet is unlaced, his boots pulled off by his companions. There is nothing hurried about it. The whole process is meant to draw out the moment, to let every embroidered sleeve and lace cuff be admired one last time before vanishing into the privacy of blankets. The bed itself is a showpiece, high canopied, with curtains embroidered in gold thread and sheets rumored to have been washed in rosewater. The pillows bear stitched symbols for fertility, pomegranates, rabbits, sometimes even a discreetly stylized vine. Beneath it all, the mattress smells faintly of lavender from the herbs tucked into its stuffing. Once the couple is tucked in, attendants bow and retreat, though a few linger by the door. Outside, the laughter of the departing guests drifts away, along with the clink of goblets and the faint shuffle of shoes on stone. Inside the curtained bed, the couple is alone, or at least as alone as two people can be when half the court is standing in the hallway. In royal life, even intimacy begins with a performance. The night passes into the still gray of morning, but here in the royal apartments, daylight isn't the only clock that matters. The court has its own schedule for nearly everything, including, quite astonishingly, when the royal couple is supposed to be intimate. And that schedule, believe it or not, might be written in the stars. Mainstream historical fact: medieval and Renaissance courts often consulted astrologers for matters of state battle dates, coronations, treaty signings. But in some cases, the same astrologers were quietly asked to choose the most auspicious times for marital relations, especially if an heir was urgently needed. The right hour, the right moon phase, the right alignment of planets, these were all considered vital for producing a healthy, legitimate child. A quirky tidbit: some astrologers charged extra to create elaborate bedroom charts showing not just days, but exact hours to maximize fertility. These charts sometimes included advice on direction. Yes, as in which way the bed should face. One 15th century French record even suggests that wearing certain colors on the chosen night could encourage conception. Historians still argue whether these astrological consultations were truly taken seriously by the monarchs themselves, or whether they served more as a way for courtiers to feel like they were doing something about the succession. Either way, it gave everyone involved the feeling that destiny and the heavens were lending their approval. Picture it: the royal astrologer, in his long robe and pointed cap, standing by the window with a brass astrolabe, muttering about Saturn's position while the chamberlain takes careful notes. Downstairs, the kitchens might be preparing specific foods: honey cakes, almonds, or roasted doves, because they too were considered helpful. By the time the chosen hour arrives, the bed is turned to face the correct direction. A ceremonial candle is lit at precisely the astrologically approved moment, and the couple is politely reminded that tonight is, well, their duty night. Whether passion has anything to do with it is beside the point. In a world where politics, superstition, and romance tangle together like the threads of a tapestry, even love can be penciled into the court calendar right alongside jousts, council meetings, and hunting trips. The night passes into the still gray of morning, but here in the royal apartments, daylight isn't the only clock that matters. The court has its own schedule for nearly everything, including, quite astonishingly, when the royal couple is supposed to be intimate, and that schedule, believe it or not, might be written in the stars. Mainstream historical fact: medieval and Renaissance courts often consulted astrologers for matters of state, battle dates, coronations, treaty signings. But in some cases, the same astrologers were quietly asked to choose the most auspicious times for marital relations, especially if an heir was urgently needed. The right hour, the right moon phase, the right alignment of planets, these were all considered vital for producing a healthy, legitimate child. A quirky tidbit: some astrologers charged extra to create elaborate bedroom charts showing not just days, but exact hours to maximize fertility. These charts sometimes included advice on direction. Yes, as in which way the bed should face. One 15th century French record even suggests that wearing certain colors on the chosen night could encourage conception. Historians still argue whether these astrological consultations were truly taken seriously by the monarchs themselves, or whether they served more as a way for courtiers to feel like they were doing something about the succession. Either way, it gave everyone involved the feeling that destiny and the heavens were lending their approval. Picture it: the royal astrologer, in his long robe and pointed cap, standing by the window with a brass astrolabe, muttering about Saturn's position while the chamberlain takes careful notes. Downstairs, the kitchens might be preparing specific foods: honey cakes, almonds, or roasted doves, because they too were considered helpful. By the time the chosen hour arrives, the bed is turned to face the correct direction. A ceremonial candle is lit at precisely the astrologically approved moment, and the couple is politely reminded that tonight is, well, their duty night. Whether passion has anything to do with it is beside the point. In a world where politics, superstition, and romance tangle together like the threads of a tapestry, even love can be penciled into the court calendar right alongside jousts, council meetings, and hunting trips. The great hall is alive again by evening, torches flaring against the oak beams as servants carry in platters that steam and glisten. This is no ordinary supper. It's a fertility feast, arranged with the same careful symbolism as a religious ceremony. In the world of medieval royalty, food could be more than sustenance. It could be a spell, a whispered wish for heirs, served course by course. Mainstream historical fact: certain foods were believed to spark desire or improve fertility. Pomegranates, with their jewel-bright seeds, symbolized abundance and life. Almonds, figs, and dates were prized for their sweetness and warming qualities, as described in medieval humoral theory. Even peacocks roasted and redressed in their own feathers could be part of the display, though they were more about spectacle than science. A quirky tidbit: some royal kitchens arranged the entire banquet table in symbolic shapes: a circle for eternity, a triangle for the Holy Trinity's blessing on the union. In one 15th century record, the dessert course was arranged into the shape of a pair of swans touching beaks, a gentle nod to marital harmony, or at least the hope for it. Historians still argue whether these elaborate menus were genuinely thought to work, or were simply another way for the court to feel they were helping in royal matters. The line between sincere belief and performance was often as blurred as the wine cups after midnight. Tonight's feast is thick with such signals. Bowls of spiced wine are passed along the high table, the cinnamon and nutmeg meant to heat the blood. A great dish of oysters, messy, briny, and awkward to eat in front of company, is set directly before the royal couple. Servants bring in honey cakes shaped like doves, placing them with exaggerated ceremony. The queen lifts a pomegranate half, its seeds glistening in the torchlight. The king cracks an almond between his teeth, nodding approvingly, as if this, right here, is the first step toward an heir. Around them, the court hums with talk, some genuinely hopeful, some quietly amused. Because in the end, whether these foods worked was almost beside the point. The feast was its own kind of magic, a way for everyone at the table to feel invested in the future, one carefully arranged plate at a time. The great hall is alive again by evening, torches flaring against the oak beams as servants carry in platters that steam and glisten. This is no ordinary supper. It's a fertility feast, arranged with the same careful symbolism as a religious ceremony. In the world of medieval royalty, food could be more than sustenance. It could be a spell, a whispered wish for heirs, served course by course. Mainstream historical fact: certain foods were believed to spark desire or improve fertility. Pomegranates, with their jewel-bright seeds, symbolized abundance and life. Almonds, figs, and dates were prized for their sweetness and warming qualities, as described in medieval humoral theory. Even peacocks roasted and redressed in their own feathers could be part of the display, though they were more about spectacle than science. A quirky tidbit: some royal kitchens arranged the entire banquet table in symbolic shapes: a circle for eternity, a triangle for the Holy Trinity's blessing on the union. In one 15th century record, the dessert course was arranged into the shape of a pair of swans touching beaks, a gentle nod to marital harmony, or at least the hope for it. Historians still argue whether these elaborate menus were genuinely thought to work, or were simply another way for the court to feel they were helping in royal matters. The line between sincere belief and performance was often as blurred as the wine cups after midnight. Tonight's feast is thick with such signals. Bowls of spiced wine are passed along the high table, the cinnamon and nutmeg meant to heat the blood. A great dish of oysters, messy, briny, and awkward to eat in front of company, is set directly before the royal couple. Servants bring in honey cakes shaped like doves, placing them with exaggerated ceremony. The queen lifts a pomegranate half, its seeds glistening in the torchlight. The king cracks an almond between his teeth, nodding approvingly, as if this, right here, is the first step toward an heir. Around them, the court hums with talk, some genuinely hopeful, some quietly amused. Because in the end, whether these foods worked was almost beside the point. The feast was its own kind of magic, a way for everyone at the table to feel invested in the future, one carefully arranged plate at a time. Night settles over the palace, and the bedchamber glows in the wavering light of beeswax candles. The curtains are drawn tight against the draft, the sheets smoothed, the pillows fluffed. But it's not just fine linens and embroidered hangings that make this room royal. Look closer, and you'll see the bed itself is guarded, not by soldiers, but by relics. Mainstream historical fact: in the medieval imagination, sacred objects could offer divine protection, even in matters of the bed. Royals might keep reliquaries, small containers holding bones, cloth, or other items linked to saints, close at hand, believing they would bless the union, protect fertility, or shield against illness. A quirky tidbit: one French queen was said to have a fragment of Saint Valentine's skull in a gilded case on her nightstand, while an English noblewoman reportedly slept with a strip of cloth said to have touched the Virgin Mary's robe sewn into her pillow. Some even placed relics under the mattress, like spiritual insulation. Historians still argue whether such relics were chosen for genuine religious devotion, or whether they were just another layer of political theater, a way to present a royal marriage as sanctioned by heaven itself. After all, displaying your relics was as much about image as it was about faith. In tonight's chamber, a gold-plated reliquary rests on the headboard shelf, shaped like a tiny church spire. Near it hangs a rosary heavy with gemstones, its cross polished by years of careful handling. The air smells faintly of frankincense, perhaps from earlier prayers whispered over the bed. The queen runs her hand over a silk pouch at the pillow's edge, feeling the hard edge of something inside. The king glances toward the reliquary before slipping between the sheets. In this room, even the act of lying down is touched by ceremony, guarded by the idea that heaven is watching and perhaps quietly approving. The fire in the chamber has burned low, casting long shadows across the carved bedposts. But tonight, the man and woman slipping beneath the covers are not truly husband and wife, not in the way you might think. This is a royal wedding bed, yes, but the groom is hundreds of miles away. In his place lies a proxy, mainstream historical fact. In the medieval and early modern periods, royal marriages were sometimes arranged between people who had never met in person. To seal the union before the couple could be together physically, a proxy wedding might be held complete with vows, blessings, and in rare cases, a symbolic bedding where a trusted noble stood in for the absent spouse. A quirky tidbit: in 1499, Catherine of Aragon wed Arthur, Prince of Wales, by proxy in Spain. Arthur was in England at the time for the ceremony. A stand-in placed one bare leg beside Catherine's under the covers, a gesture meant to complete the marriage in the eyes of the law, without any actual intimacy. These moments were often more awkward than romantic, with everyone involved painfully aware of the formality. Historians still argue whether proxy beddings were ever meant to imply actual consummation, or if they were purely theatrical rituals to satisfy legal custom. Surviving descriptions usually suggest the latter, though the detail of a bare leg certainly left room for court gossip. Picture it now. The bride sits stiffly in bed while a stand-in, perhaps a cousin or senior courtier, lies beside her for the briefest of moments. A bishop mumbles the final blessing, the attendants nod, and the proxy quickly rises, bowing before retreating to the safety of the outer chamber. In the morning, official letters will declare the marriage sealed. Whether the bride feels married is another matter entirely. royal life, paperwork and politics can climb into bed long before the real partner ever arrives. Morning sunlight spills through the tall, narrow windows, glinting off the gold thread in the bed hangings. The court is already buzzing with whispers, not about politics this time, but about a gift. Somewhere in the labyrinth of the palace, a small, velvet-lined box has changed hands. Inside is not a jewel or coin, but something far more personal, a royal love token. Mainstream historical fact. In medieval courts, lovers, whether married or secret, often exchanged intimate keepsakes. These could be practical items, like rings or gloves, or deeply personal ones, such as a lock of hair, a handwritten poem, or even a piece of clothing worn close to the skin. For royals, these tokens could be charged with layers of meaning: political, romantic, and symbolic, all at once. A quirky tidbit: Mary, Queen of Scots, reportedly gave a diamond ring to Lord Darnley before their marriage, while Henry VIII was said to exchange tiny, jewel-encrusted girdle books with Anne Boleyn, miniature prayer books that could be worn at the waist. Some tokens, however, veered into the peculiar. There are records of lovers gifting preserved rose petals from a shared bouquet, dried orange peels carried in a glove, and even a ribbon scented with the giver's own hands. Historians still argue whether these gifts were treasured for genuine emotion or for the political leverage they could provide if displayed or returned at the right moment. In a world where rumor could shift alliances, the mere sight of a certain ring on a royal finger could send the court into a frenzy of speculation. In today's scene, the queen lifts the token from its box, a delicate braid of hair tied with silk thread, smelling faintly of cloves. She presses it to her lips before hiding it in the folds of her gown. Somewhere, the giver waits for a signal, a glance across the hall, a touch on the arm that the gift has been received and understood. It is, perhaps, a small rebellion against the formality of royal life. A private message hidden in plain sight, small enough to carry in a pocket, but powerful enough to unsettle an entire court. The afternoon court session has ended, and the great hall has been transformed. The long trestle tables are pushed back, the rushes on the floor swept into neat patterns, and the air carries the faint sweetness of wine and violets. This isn't a feast, nor a formal council. It's a performance of affection, one of the elaborate games of courtly love that weave through royal life like threads of gold in a tapestry. Mainstream historical fact: courtly love was a highly stylized form of romance that flourished in medieval noble and royal circles, inspired by chivalric ideals and troubadour poetry. The lovers often weren't spouses at all, but chosen partners for a kind of public flirtation, conducted within strict, unspoken rules. The lady might grant her knight a token, a scarf, a glove, and he would vow to serve her faithfully, often in tournaments or poetic contests. A quirky tidbit: some courts staged mock trials of love, where noble judges ruled on matters such as whether a lady should accept a gift from a knight, or how many sighs were appropriate before declaring devotion. In certain French courts, men would literally pretend to die for love, collapsing dramatically until revived by a lady's touch, or, more often, her laughter. Historians still argue how much of courtly love was meant to be taken seriously. For some, it was a genuine emotional connection wrapped in ritual. For others, it was a social game, a safe outlet for flirtation in a world where marriages were political contracts. Tonight, the Queen presides over such a scene, seated on a high dais as young lords kneel before her, reciting verses they've spent days composing. One offers a painted fan as her token of beauty. Another swears he will not eat until she permits it, an oath the kitchen staff will likely break before dawn. She plays her role perfectly, smiling with just enough warmth to encourage, but not enough to promise. Around the hall, the courtiers watch and whisper, knowing that every gesture, every coy glance, is both entertainment and a reminder. Here, love is as carefully choreographed as any dance. The candles burn low in the antechamber, and a hush settles over the gathered attendants. This is not a feast, not a dance, and certainly not a playful game of courtly love. This is business, uncomfortable, invasive, but deemed necessary in the politics of royal marriage. The proving of virginity. Mainstream historical fact. In certain high-stakes unions, a bride's purity could be a matter of state. A dowry might depend on it. A treaty could hinge upon it. In such cases, matrons, women of high rank and supposedly unimpeachable character, might be called to examine the bride before the wedding, or to inspect the bed afterward for proof of consummation. A quirky tidbit. In some Spanish and Italian courts, a stained sheet would be displayed to the assembled household the morning after the wedding, an act as public as it was awkward. In other places, the proof was more symbolic. The sheet shone folded, with no one inspecting it too closely, allowing everyone to nod gravely and move on. Historians still argue how often these inspections were genuine, and how often they were carefully staged. After all, too much truth could ruin more than a marriage. It could topple an alliance. There are whispered accounts of sheets being prepared in advance with drops of animal blood, a bit of stagecraft to keep treaties intact. Tonight, the young bride sits quietly, her hands folded in her lap as the matrons approach. Their faces are stern, their voices low, the air thick with incense, as if to sanctify the task. Outside, the courtiers wait, pretending not to listen for the rustle of fabric or the closing murmur of agreement. At last, the matrons emerge, offering a single nod to the chamberlain. Whether the truth has been told or merely arranged, the result is the same. The marriage stands, the dowry flows, and the kingdom sleeps easier, at least for tonight. The palace kitchens are quiet after the evening meal, the great hearths still radiating warmth, but not every pot here is for soup. and not every bundle of herbs hanging from the rafters is meant for stew. Tonight, a smaller fire glows in a side room, and over it hangs a brass pan filled with a thick, sweet-smelling brew. This is not dinner, it's a charm. Mainstream historical fact. Medieval people placed great faith in potions and talismans to influence love, desire, and fidelity. Royals were no exception. Recipes for aphrodisiacs might include honey, saffron, cinnamon, and exotic imports like ambergris. Some were brewed into spiced wines. Others were pressed into lozenges to be dissolved slowly and discreetly. A quirky tidbit, not all ingredients were so appetizing. Some love potions called for ground pearls, rooster combs, or even powdered dried beetles, believed to warm the blood. In more superstitious corners, charms might be sewn into clothing, a tiny carved figure, a sprig of vervain, or a strip of parchment inscribed with protective words. Historians still argue whether these concoctions had any physical effect beyond the placebo of belief. The humoral theory of medicine suggested that warming spices could indeed stir the passions. But whether anyone's heart was truly moved by beetle dust is another matter entirely. In tonight's secret scene, a royal apothecary stirs the pan with a slow, deliberate rhythm. On a nearby table, a velvet pouch spills over with talismans, small silver hearts, knotted cords, and bits of parchment, inked with looping Latin charms. A maid watches, glancing nervously toward the door. This work is half medicine, half mystery, and not every bishop approves. The finished potion is poured into a glass flask and stoppered tight. By tomorrow night, it will be slipped discreetly into a goblet at the high table, whether as a token of devotion, a desperate gamble for an heir, or simply another layer of palace intrigue, is known only to its maker. The great cathedral bells toll in the clear morning air, their deep notes rolling across the palace grounds. Today is no ordinary holy day. It is a public fertility blessing, the kind that draws both the devout and the curious into the same crowded square. For a royal couple, this is a performance of hope and lineage, witnessed not by a few courtiers, but by an entire city. Mainstream historical fact. In parts of medieval Europe, royal marriages were followed by public ceremonies meant to bless the union with children. These could involve processions, masses, or even the symbolic presentation of the royal bed to the people, its linens newly blessed by the clergy. The aim was as much about reassuring the public as it was about divine intervention. A quirky tidbit. In some German principalities, newlyweds were led to the cathedral steps, where they were sprinkled with holy water while holding hands over a loaf of bread, later broken, and shared with the crowd as a charm for fertility. Elsewhere, clergy would bless the marital chamber itself, walking in solemn procession to the royal apartments with incense, candles, and chanting choirs. Historians still argue how much of this was truly religious ritual, and how much was political theater. A public blessing reassured subjects that the monarch's focus was on securing the succession, something that could keep rival claimants at bay. Today's ceremony is a spectacle of color and sound. The queen wears a gown embroidered with vine and pomegranate motifs. The king in a cloak of deep crimson lined with ermine. The bishop sprinkles holy water over them as the choir sings, the incense curling upward into the open sky. The crowd cheers, tossing flower petals at the royal couple's feet. It is a day of hope, a day when the kingdom collectively wills the future into being. And in the medieval mind, perhaps the very sound of the bells carries the blessing home. The morning after the blessing, the court bustles with preparations for the week's audiences, and the wardrobe chamber is a flurry of color and fabric. Yet, even here, among silks and satins, the royal tailors work within invisible boundaries. In the medieval world, clothing was not just fashion, it was law. And sometimes, those laws were aimed squarely at desire itself. Mainstream historical fact: sumptuary laws regulated what people could wear based on their rank, wealth, or role. For royals and nobles, these laws were as much about preserving hierarchy as they were about morality. Certain colors, like deep crimson or Tyrian purple, were reserved for the highest ranks. Fabrics such as cloth of gold or fine velvet could be worn only by those with permission. A quirky tidbit: some laws extended into the realm of seduction. In 14th century England, unmarried women were forbidden to wear trains on their gowns, supposedly to discourage flirtation. In Florence, sumptuary rules dictated how low a neckline could be cut. And in Burgundy, there were even restrictions on the use of fur trims for women under a certain age. Historians still argue whether these rules truly curbed temptation or merely inspired more creative ways to skirt them, like wearing sheer fabrics over a technically lawful neckline. In courts across Europe, fashion often became a playful contest between tailor and lawmaker. Today, the queen's gown is being assembled layer by layer. Her seamstress chooses a deep blue silk, allowed for her rank, and a modest neckline embroidered with pearls, but the sleeves flare wide enough to reveal a flash of cloth of silver beneath, just enough to remind the court that she is above such petty restrictions. The king, too, plays the game, donning a cloak lined with sable, a luxury forbidden to almost everyone else. In this court, every hem and jewel is a statement, every thread a quiet assertion of privilege, and perhaps a spark of allure carefully lit within the law's tight embrace. The court's corridors are rarely silent, but today the whispers carry a sharper edge. A name has been spoken too often, glances exchanged too knowingly. By evening, the rumors harden into fact. Someone is to be sent away. In the medieval royal world, exile was more than punishment. It was the quiet erasure of a scandal before it could spread too far. Mainstream historical fact: nobles who engaged in affairs deemed dangerous whether politically inconvenient, morally offensive, or simply embarrassing to the crown, could be exiled from court. This exile might mean banishment to an estate in the countryside, confinement in a remote castle, or for foreign nobles, a forced return to their homeland. The aim was to remove the offending party from the center of influence and gossip, a quirky tidbit. In some cases, the exile was framed as a diplomatic mission to soften the blow. A courtier might be sent to oversee trade in a distant port or act as an ambassador to a minor ally, essentially gilding the cage. Letters home often contained careful hints of loneliness, frustration, or the endless boredom of provincial life. Historians still argue whether these exiles were primarily about morality or politics, an affair with the wrong person, a royal spouse, a rival faction leader, even a favored servant could threaten the delicate balance of alliances. Sometimes it was safer to remove the person than to address the affair openly. Tonight, the condemned courtier dines alone for the last time in the great hall. The glances that meet his are half pity, half relief. By dawn, he will be riding out under guard, the city gates closing behind him. The royal couple will appear in public as if nothing has happened, the scandal folded neatly into the unspoken history of the court. Here, love could elevate you to the highest favor, or send you packing to the farthest edge of the map. The chapel at dawn is hushed, its cool air carrying the faint scent of beeswax and old incense. Sunlight filters through stained glass, casting jeweled patterns on the flagstone floor. It is here, in this place of prayer, that one of the court's most forbidden dances plays out, not of music, but of glances and whispered words. Mainstream historical fact: royal chapels were more than places for worship. They were also quiet, enclosed spaces where members of the court could meet without attracting immediate suspicion. The constant flow of clergy, choir boys, and attendants meant comings and goings could be hidden within the normal bustle of religious life. A quirky tidbit: in some courts, lovers met during the long pauses of Latin Mass, communicating with nothing more than hand signals or the passing of a folded note within a hymn book. In others, the wooden confessionals became hiding places for brief, urgent exchanges, not for spiritual counsel, but for arranging future meetings. Historians still argue whether these chapel rendezvous were as frequent as rumor claimed, or if the stories grew from a few scandalous events, retold with creative flourishes. What is certain is that the mixture of solemn ritual and the thrill of secrecy made such encounters dangerously tempting. This morning, the Queen kneels at the front, her veil falling like a curtain between her and the congregation. Far back in the shadows, a young courtier slips into a side pew, his eyes never leaving her. Between verses, a folded scrap of parchment changes hands via a passing altar boy, innocent in appearance, heavy with meaning. When the service ends, the two leave by separate doors, faces composed, movements measured. The stained glass hides the truth from the outside world, but within these walls, a different kind of devotion has been practiced, one no priest would dare bless. The great hall is transformed tonight. Tapestries are drawn back to reveal towering candle stands, their flames flickering against the vaulted ceiling. The air hums with music, lutes, viols, and the soft beat of a tabor. And the floor is alive with figures in silk and velvet, yet no one here is who they seem. Every face is hidden behind a mask. Mainstream historical fact. Masked balls became a favored entertainment in many European courts from the late Middle Ages into the Renaissance. These events allowed nobles to step outside the rigid rules of court etiquette, if only for a few hours. Masks gave anonymity, and with it came a freedom to flirt, scheme, or speak more boldly than daylight would permit. A quirky tidbit. In some courts, elaborate guessing games formed part of the evening, where masked dancers would exchange riddles or offer cryptic compliments, their identities revealed only at midnight. Others took the intrigue further, matching partners for dances by drawing lots from a silver bowl, ensuring unexpected and sometimes scandalous pairings. Historians still argue whether these balls truly offered anonymity in tight-knit courts, where everyone recognized each other's voices and mannerisms. Some suggest the masks were less about disguise and more about the playful illusion of secrecy. Tonight, the queen glides across the floor in a gown of midnight blue, her mask adorned with tiny silver stars. A tall figure in black approaches, offering a hand without a word. They move together in time to the music, the crowd parting for them. Around them, laughter rises, gloved hands brush in passing, and whispered promises disappear beneath the cover of music and candlelight. By the time the clock chimes 12 and masks are lifted, the night will have created new rumors and rekindled old ones. In this hall, behind a painted mask, even the most careful royal could dare to misstep, if only in dance. By daylight, the royal apartments are a blaze of color, not from the furniture, but from the walls themselves. Here, the cold stone is hidden beneath vast tapestries, their threads dyed in rich reds, greens, and blues. At first glance, they seem like noble scenes of hunting, feasting, or biblical virtue. But look closer, and another story begins to emerge. Mainstream historical fact: medieval and Renaissance tapestries were not only decoration, they were status symbols, portable luxuries, and subtle storytellers. Some were woven with allegories that carried hidden political or moral messages. Others concealed private jokes or coded references that only certain viewers could understand. A quirky tidbit: in more than one surviving tapestry, a seemingly innocent hunt scene hides flirtatious undertones. A lady offering a knight her falcon, a symbol for yielding affection, or a stag being captured in a net, a metaphor that needed little explanation to a knowing courtier. One famous set, The Lady and the Unicorn, is often read as an intricate allegory of love, temptation, and the senses. Historians still argue how intentionally erotic these designs were they bold statements meant to entertain and provoke conversation, or simply artistic flourishes later reinterpreted by scandal-loving viewers. The truth may lie somewhere in between. In The Queen's Solar, one panel depicts a lady handing a flower to a kneeling knight. The court poet swears it's an allegory of loyalty. The ladies-in-waiting exchange glances that say otherwise. In another scene, a swan carries a ribbon in its beak, gliding toward a waiting maiden, purely symbolic to some, pointedly suggestive to others. The tapestries warm the room in winter, soften the echo of footsteps, and for those with an eye for symbolism, turn the very walls into a slow, wordless conversation. In a court where every glance is measured, it's the threads that sometimes tell the boldest tales. The corridors are tense today, the usual murmur of court replaced by clipped orders and hurried footsteps. Something has happened, something everyone knows about, but no one dares mention outright. By evening, the truth comes in whispers, a betrayal in the royal bedchamber, and the punishment will be swift. Mainstream historical fact in medieval and Renaissance courts. Adultery or betrayal involving royalty could bring consequences far beyond personal disgrace. For nobles, it could mean loss of lands, titles, or freedom. In some cases, it meant exile to a remote estate, imprisonment in a tower, or rarely but dramatically execution. The severity often depended less on morality and more on politics. A quirky tidbit, some monarchs had a flair for public shaming. One French king reportedly paraded a disgraced courtier through the streets in a donkey cart, a paper crown on his head, while others favored the quieter, but equally humiliating, removal of the offender's name from all court lists and records, as though they had never existed. Historians still argue whether punishments were harsher for actual betrayal or for the embarrassment it caused. In a court fueled by reputation, the latter could be far more dangerous. The scandal itself, not the act, was often what demanded a decisive, visible response. Tonight, the great hall is filled with courtiers feigning polite conversation, while their eyes flick toward the far doors. At last, the condemned is led out, flanked by guards. There is no shouting, no public outburst, just the slow, deliberate walk toward the gates, the weight of silence as final as any sentence. The next day, the court will move on. New intrigues will take the place of the old. But for a while, the empty chair at the high table will remind everyone that in royal circles, passion may be dangerous, but discovery is fatal. The years roll forward, and the faces in the royal portraits change. New monarchs take the throne. Fashions shift from pointed hennons to broad ruffs, from fur-lined cloaks to silken doublets. Yet beneath the changing fabrics and hairstyles, the heartbeat of courtly life remains the same, steady, deliberate, and still tinged with the the same mix of politics, performance, and passion. Mainstream historical fact: the customs of medieval royal romance, whether real or ceremonial, didn't vanish with the Middle Ages. Many traditions evolved, blending into the refined etiquette of Renaissance courts or the calculated elegance of the 18th century. Public betrothals, ceremonial beddings, and gift exchanges persisted in altered forms, their roots still visible to anyone who looked closely. A quirky tidbit: even in the 19th century, a few European courts staged symbolic bedding ceremonies for royal newlyweds, complete with processions and blessings, though the events had become more theatrical than binding. In some places, the display of a love token or the commissioning of a suggestive tapestry was as much a nod to history as it was a personal indulgence. Historians still argue whether these rituals survived because they truly mattered to the people involved, or simply because tradition, once established, has a way of defending itself. A king who abolished them entirely might seem to be rejecting the weight of his own ancestors. Today, the old tapestries still hang in museum halls. The gilded bed frames, the jeweled gloves, and the silver goblets sit in glass cases, their meanings whispered in plaques and guided tour. The people who once used them are long gone, but the intrigue remains, frozen in time, waiting for curious minds to lean closer. In the end, the legacy of royal passion is not only in the scandals and the ceremonies, but in the enduring reminder that love, however it is dressed, has always been as much about story as it is about truth. The palace lies quiet now, its long galleries empty, the music and murmurs faded into the deep stillness of night. Candles gutter low in their holders, sending tiny curls of smoke into the air before winking out one by one. In the absence of footsteps and voices, the old stones seem to breathe, holding centuries of secrets in their cool silence. You can almost hear them, the faint rustle of silks behind closed doors, the creak of a bed frame long gone to dust, the soft laughter of a conversation meant for no ears but two. Those moments have passed, but their shadows linger in the walls, in the threads of tapestries, in the curve of carved oak chairs. Somewhere, a draft moves through the corridors, carrying the scent of beeswax and faded lavender from rooms that once brimmed with life. The stories of royal passion, strange customs, and whispered intrigues have quieted, settling into the dust like fallen petals after a feast. And now, as you sit in the hush, the details begin to blur. The jeweled gowns and solemn ceremonies melt into warm shapes and muted colors. The flicker of torchlight softens into the slow glow of memory. All that's left is the gentle rhythm of stillness, the knowledge that the world turns, and yet these echoes remain. They are safe here, tucked away in the folds of time, undisturbed until someone else leans in to listen. So let your mind rest with them. Let the quiet wrap around you like the heavy curtains of a royal bed, warm and enclosing. Let your breath fall into the same steady pace as the sleeping palace. And when the last imagined candle flickers out, you'll already be drifting softly, soundlessly into dreams.